Hello, everyone. Welcome to Genealogy Adventures. This is Brian Sheffy.
And this is Danya Williams. How are you doing today?
All I have to say, cousin, is if anyone had told me I would be experiencing 70-degree weather in December, I would have never believed it.
Oh, you don't have to rub that in. That's Patty. That's Patty.
I'll send a little bit your way. I'll send some. I'll send some north. Is
On,
this
on
this?
the real, it's not that bad here. It's like it's actually not that bad. It's okay. It's okay.
Okay, okay. So long as y'all aren't freezing.
No,
Yeah,
we're
this is
not
good.
freezing.
This is going to take a while to get used to. But listen, huge shout out to all of you who are tuning in. Thank you, as always, for spending the next hour with us, no matter how you're tuning in or where you're tuning in. And we have a really, really fascinating show for you today. I know all of our shows are fascinating, but this one's going to be different. This one's going to be a little extra. And saying that, I would like to welcome Grant Mishoe to the show. Grant Mishoe is a genealogist and historical researcher with 3 decades of experience. He's currently a genealogy researcher at the Center for Family History at the new International African American Museum in Charleston, South Carolina. Grant's roots in Charleston, South Carolina run deep, his family establishing themselves in the region in 1687 after arriving from France. This historical connection enhances his understanding of the local heritage and underlies his passion in bringing Charleston's history to light. His passion lies in the protection and preservation of enslaved and African American burial grounds. He is committed to ensuring that the story of those who came before us endure. From 2017 to 2020, Grant served as the historical researcher and genealogist for the Gullah Society, contributing his skills to unraveling the rich tapestry of enslaved and African American burial grounds. His specialization also extends to the history of the United States colored troops during the Civil War, unraveling the often overlooked narratives of African American military service. Prior to joining the museum, Grant dedicated 17 years to the fire service. He ascended the ranks, retiring as a heavy rescue captain in 2010. Welcome to the show, Grant.
Hey, thank you for having me today.
Oh, listen, it's going to be our absolute pleasure. And 1687, I mean, that's a long time for a family to kind of stay put.
Yes, that's 13 generations, roughly. So,
Wow. And a lot of history to uncover. And softball question that we ask all of our guests. When did you actually get started researching your family, and what was it about it that just drew you in and kept you going?
my stepmother started doing genealogy. Um, she's adopted, and I just kind of started along with it. I'd been kind of interested in it before, but she really set the path, and I have everything to basically attribute to her and set me that way. And quickly realized that some people don't want to know where their family comes, and the other ones cannot get enough and find the bottom of the rabbit hole. So I'm the latter.
And I'm going to say it's quite the change to go from being in the fire service to actually being a jobbing genealogist.
It is. I had done research on the Charleston Fire Department history of a lot of fire departments in the United States. And after 9/11, I really got interested in the old burial sites for a lot of these early fire departments, and it kind of amalgamated into one thing to another, and I'm where I'm at now.
Excellent. And what was it particularly about African American genealogy and genealogical research that I don't know that got you involved in doing that kind of work?
I had been collecting information on cemeteries for a while, and had been doing both sides of the aisle, I guess you'd say. And then I was introduced to Dr. Ade Ojani Ofunyan with the Gullah Society, and basically it just skyrocketed from there. He, sorry that now he has passed away, but basically the Gullah Society was there to find, rescue, repair any African American, or African descent burial ground, that type thing. Our first project was the Anson Street burial, where they found the great cemetery underneath the at George Street and Anson Street.
Excellent. And you and I had a chat when I first arrived in Charleston and first started working at the museum. I just really wanted to share that with the audience because I find it fascinating. If you wouldn't, for the benefit of the audience, talk about the kind of process investigating a potential African American burial ground, confirming that that's what it is, and what the whole process is to kind of identify, protect, and preserve that part of history.
The finding enslaved burial grounds is difficult. One of the things you have to remember is every plantation had slaves, but not every plantation had burial grounds. So for every one or two that we find, there's probably 10 or more that we'll never find, have been developed on that type of thing. So in the Low Country region, it's rather is a good thing for us because we will look along the edge of the water on plantations, because the water, being next to the water, was a pathway back to Africa. So we'll see a lot of those cemeteries posted along water, old plat maps for different areas. Anybody that older people that might know where the burial ground's at. I utilize LIDAR to look through the trees and see ground anomalies, that type thing. Ground penetrating radar for an area. The ground penetrating radar works. It'll tell you there's something under the ground. So if you're in the middle of a field and you find one thing, it could be anything. But if you go in the middle of that field and find graves on the east-west boundary and there's multiple that are close together, it's most likely the cemetery. So you have to use different, information to try to come to the final conclusion.
Okay. And what kind of permissions are involved to allow you to be on the land and I guess potentially to start doing initial excavations?
Well, I'm talking from a South Carolina point of view. Basically, I search permission from every piece of property I go on to. Because that's, I don't want to get shot or, get in trouble, that type thing. South Carolina's law is pretty forward with the stuff, but it is slightly archaic in content, but it does allow for the families to continue to visit their loved ones. And even if it's, let's say, geographically okay, if it's in the middle of a city, in between two houses, there's a good chance they're not going to let you bury in there, the coroner, that type thing, or the city manager. But if you're out in the middle of the country, you can still get your family buried in that cemetery, and they're not allowed to say no. The problem is of course, you have several people or lots of people that have different attitudes about African American cemeteries. And if you go up to somebody and say, hey, how you doing? I'd like to talk to you about the cemetery on your property. And they say, what cemetery? And because a lot of times those cemeteries just drop off the plat maps over a period of years. And then you have somebody down the line, all of a sudden they buy this property and it doesn't have anything mentioned in the cemetery on it. And then you go nail them and say, hey, there's a cemetery on your property. And they said, no, there's not. I said, yes, sir. That type thing. And sometimes, most of the time, I don't have any issue with people. There are special occasions when we do. But you just have to grin and bear it, because in the end, it is their property. But in the long run, you cannot just go on the property whenever you want to. You have to work with the owner of the plantation or the property or the land to come up to a suitable time to where you can enter and go to the property, depending on where it's at and that type thing. So there's a lot of gears in the machine when that stuff comes like that.
Well, thankfully at the museum, we're actually getting, I'm going to start saying a regular stream of email inquiries about people who know that they have African American burials on their property, or they suspect that there may be, and wanted to work with the museum in terms of uncovering the history and the story, and potentially even maybe doing the genealogy of the people who are buried there. But there's one that I'd really love for you to share with the audience. It's the gentleman from York County, South Carolina.
Right. I was contacted by a gentleman from York County that had purchased a piece of property in York County. This gentleman was of old York County stock, back prior to the Civil War. And he said he had purchased, I want to say, his 35 or 45 acres in rural York County. And he had discovered there was a black cemetery on the property. It had 6 or 7 gravestones on it, but they were set far apart, which is a pretty good indication you're going to have unmarked burials in between those gravestones, that type thing. He had some people from Charleston go up, and they did ground penetrating radar, and they went from 6 or 7 gravestones to 144 graves. And the gentleman basically was floored that this cemetery was right in the middle of his property. He basically cleaned the entire property off, ID'd all the graves. He put a conservation easement on the property so nobody can ever build on the cemetery ever again. Nobody can take any of that rural area, that type thing. It's under a conservation easement forever. He has put a fence around it, and he's having a custom-made wrought iron front gate made with African symbols and sanctuary symbols and that type thing. And he's doing it all out of his own pocket. He's in talking with them. He said that he doesn't want to bring any notoriety to the plantation, saying like, this is Timbuktu Plantation Cemetery. So they named the cemetery after the creek that runs behind it. It's called Fishing Creek Cemetery. So that's, and I can understand that. But yeah, but also what he did is he went to a stonemason and had individual granite or marble, I can't remember what it was, small stones put in with numbers on them, indicating each one of the graves that are in there from 1 to 144. And he did all this out of his own money.
So, and the reason why I wanted to share that with the audience is, it really does show just the spectrum of people's responses to those who try to, no pun intended, bury that history or obscure it, to those who want to honor the people who lived and dwelled in that land, and their remains are there.
Correct.
Is he trying to find the people that were?
I've been working with him kind of on that. He's been kind of doing the same thing, except he kind of comes to a wall per se, and we, for the most part at the museum, are ones that try to break that wall down to go farther. We haven't really got into it. We're trying to find if there's any slave schedules or property records, because in genealogy, when it comes to African American genealogy, prior to 1865 or emancipation, you have to look at your ancestors as property. And because, and then you had to pay taxes on property, so you can look at tax lists and that type thing.
So why is he not trying to bring some type of recognition to the actual plantation? If you're not, because you got to know the name of the plantation,
yes,
more information about the plantation to understand who was on that plantation, and then going from there. How are you doing that and then not,
some of the people that are buried in there have the same last name as the plantation owner to this day. And he's talked to several of the family. I don't know really why he's done that. I have my suspicions or my ideas, but it is his property. He's decided to do that. I guess he just doesn't want to taint the names or the people that are in this cemetery, because they were enslaved on this plantation, and they were buried here, and for years they went unnoticed for years, and all of a sudden he finds it, and he does the exact opposite of what a lot of people do, and he's completely cleaned it and ID'd it, and he's got the 6 stones, but I think some of them are marked, some of them are not. But you know, in the end, it's his property to do that with.
Yeah. I want
So
to
I guess
apologize in advance. Let me say this real quick. I don't know why my dog is barking today. But I want to apologize in advance, you guys, that he is just I don't know. I don't know why he's barking. So I do want to apologize for that. Okay, go ahead, Brian.
so. I guess from what I'm gathering about that, rather than because it's just so easy for attention to shift from people to a place to a plantation, he just wants to keep the focus solely on the people who were enslaved there.
Absolutely, yes.
I mean,
Which
I guess I understand that. I don't know. I mean, I think he's doing a wonderful job. I think that that's
Right.
an awesome thing that he's doing. And I also don't think that he would be tainting the name. I think he's bringing reverence and honor to it by doing what he's doing. It is definitely up to him on the move that he's making, but I think he's bringing more honor to it, to their name, by doing it the way that he, doing it and letting them know. And I applaud him 1,000%.
Now, I
1,000.
don't think he's going to completely eradicate the plantation information out of the verbiage on future events, that type thing. But they decided to name it Fishing Creek Cemetery on where it's located at geographically, rather than that in the because they got to talk about where the people were enslaved at. So
Yeah,
that would be
because
in the verbiage.
that is definitely I think telling the story of the plantation as a whole is just a beautiful thing, and I think he's just doing an awesome job, and is by starting by starting with the enslaved people there and saying their names. That's just awesome.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
The other thing that that really has impressed me about Grant's work is, and you can talk about the spreadsheet that you've developed, but even more than that, Grant has actually GPSed where a lot of these, not just the burial grounds, but the burials themselves are. And how many do you think you've collected in the time that you've been doing this?
I've got cemeteries from pretty much all of the lower 46. Some of them are actually Native American burial grounds, enslaved burial grounds, and in South Carolina, I want to say I got 1,500 or so in South Carolina alone, and I try to GPS all the graves if at all possible, but I definitely GPS mark in the center of where the burial ground is, and I'll have that information in there so people can go look at it. You just have an address and have to go look at it. I try to make it as easy as possible for the person that's doing the research. So I got to go find it. Oh, there's a GPS, so like that type. So I try to make it as easy and flowable as possible for the person doing the research.
Because we're trying to actually work out, because you have that GPS data, we're trying to work out a way to actually get this available online. Because a lot of times you'll show me on Google Maps,
right,
physically where they are. And Donnie, it gives you goosebumps, but it's also amazing because I think it was the Fishing Creek one where you showed me the area where just a handful of known graves were, but you saw the entirety of that part of where they were buried. Those handful of graves were probably just the tip of the iceberg.
Yes, in Charleston County per se, I want to say I got close to 200 between 200 to 225 cemeteries. I know there's other ones out there, but just take the peninsula of Charleston. There's about 7.5 square miles of peninsula to the North Charleston city line between the rivers. And in that section, I have 117 documented cemeteries just in that 7.5 square miles.
My God.
A lot of them are African American or African burial grounds, of which probably about 3/4 of them have been destroyed. They're under houses, roads, fields, that type of thing. The Citadel Football Stadium sits on top of one of the old public burial grounds. The old county jail, that whole block was a burial ground. There's another burial ground right down the street from it. And they're literally, Charleston is a sepulcher in itself.
Mhm.
So what do you do about that? Like, I mean, these places that are sitting on top, you know that they're sitting on top of these things. What is being done about that?
Well, like I said, there are several of them, such as Harriet Street and a few other ones that do not have any deed records whatsoever. They're just kind of like at the GIS plat lines. There's nothing there, so it's kind of it's been a cemetery forever. So nobody's going to want to buy it to build a house because they know it's a cemetery there. Now the cemeteries that are not showing with burial grounds up above it, uh, people will buy these and unknowingly, build a house on top of them. But for instance, the Citadel burial ground, back in the mid 90s, they removed the graves of one of the Hunley crews from with the CSS Hunley, and that was next to the public burial ground was a mariner's burial ground. And during the Civil War, the Charleston allowed them to bury Confederate sailors in there, and that's where one of the crews, the Hunley, was at. And when they built originally the stadium, they had to know they were burying in graves because there was, it was quite obvious that somebody had messed up some of the graves as they were putting pipes and stuff in there. So, what I've been told by, and I have no proof of this, but what I've been told by some of the workers of some of these developers is that if you see bones, just keep on moving.
Mm.
And of course, like I said, that's unsubstantiated. But with the evidence that I have of cemeteries being built on top of, and that type thing, I wouldn't say that it's too far out of the realm of possibility. Now, I'm not saying every developer is like that. I'm just saying there are people out there that are in it for the buck, obviously. And I say, if you bring notoriety to this thing, or rearrange something to where it's incorporated into the plan of the community, I think that you'll be a whole lot better off with the community in itself. Because you're not getting rid of it, that type thing.
Well, again, even the land where the museum sits on, you have to remember that was a wharf. If you're facing the museum from the street, to the right was an enormous warehouse,
Right,
which was part of the Gatson Warf complex. And as the enslaved Africans were brought off the ship, they were housed in this warehouse. And we already know that a huge number of them died. And there is a mass burial ground somewhere
that we
near
have
the
no idea.
museum.
Yeah, it's. I don't think it's going to be on the Gadsden's Green itself, because when Gadsden's Wharf was in effect, it was a working wharf. I mean, you're not going to put a mass grave in the middle of an area where you're doing business at. They could have been put into the public burial ground, or they may have just been right off of it, put in a mass grave. What's really crazy is there's no record of them ever being buried. It was, there's no names or anything. The only mention that we have of this thing ever happening was by one gentleman's diary entry about these poor souls that were passing away in this building of exposure. And that's the only evidence we have of these, 500, 550, 600 burials or people that perished in that cemetery or in that warehouse, excuse me.
So before we get on to the United States Colored Troop project that you're working on in identifying those burials, so I would imagine you've already shared with me that you found things like slave tags, and you may have to explain to the audience what slave tags were and are. What other kind of artifacts have you found doing this kind of work?
What we do is, if we have an area where we suspect a burial ground to be, we'll run metal detectors over it. And the metal detectors that the crew that I use have are really high-end metal detectors. So they can tell you what kind of metal is at what depth, that type thing. So we don't go below 12 inches. It's just, below the 12-inch line as you're playing with fire. The problem is, in Charleston, we had a very large earthquake that happened here in 1886. And it basically liquefied the ground to where some of these cemeteries, there's casket handles directly under the surface of the cemetery, the ground itself. So, we pull at nameplates, but what we do is we take them, take a picture of it, and clean it off as best as possible. Take a picture of it, and we put it back in the hole again and cover it back up. We don't take them per se, and so you can use that for that type of thing for socioeconomic standards. Basically, if you have a poor burial ground or poor people that are being buried, to higher end people, depending upon the hardware that their casket reveals. I think that the total is 600 is what I was told. So it's sad. Same thing with Denmark Vesey. Denmark Vesey's trial in 1821, when the conspirators were hung. I say conspirators with quotation marks, were hung. They buried them at night at the Ashley Oak. Didn't even list where they were buried at, and didn't even put them in the records of the burial records of the city. Just eradicated them completely from history out of martyrdom, and that was done with a purpose, because I do believe that the population of the city was like 5 or 6 to 1 black to white, and they had to make so nobody else would do it. And if you look at the transcribed copy of the actual court case when it was in trial, there's a real good chance that Denmark Vesey should not have been hung, I guess you say, is what I personally believe, but it did happen.
Absolutely.
That's
So,
crazy.
in tandem to the work that you're doing identifying Black and African and enslaved burials in Charleston and in South Carolina, another passion of yours is identifying where the final resting place of USCT soldiers. If you'd like to talk about that project.
Yes. I was a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, because having family back this far that my family goes, that we had to participate in a war or two. And I had a direct grandfather that passed away at the Battle of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. So one of the main things we did in the Sons of Confederate Veterans was try to find as many burial sites of the Confederate veterans as possible. And there's literally hundreds across South Carolina, if not thousands. And they try to ID them, clean them up, and show reverence to them, which, is fine. But with the exception of the Sons of Union veterans, there is no centralized database that I know of that includes all United States Colored Troop soldiers that passed away and their burial grounds. Now, we're not talking about the ones that only passed away during the war. We're literally talking about if we can find them, if they died in 1899, 1900, get their gravestone. And if there's a personal gravestone, we match it and say, hey, this is this soldier. You look at this guy, you wouldn't think it, but this is what he did.
Mm.
So talk a little bit about the research process for that, actually confirming that they were United States Colored Troop veterans.
One of the main problems is a lot of the soldiers had aliases, and they might sign up under one name in the war, but they may have changed their name afterward to something completely different. It might be a phonetical spelling or some type of phonetical rearrangement of the name they had. But it could be completely different, So the USCT service cards are invaluable because they have pension information, the alias names, as well as the military pension information for United States Colored Troops and United Union soldiers in itself. The other thing is they have databases that include headstone requests. Between if they requested a military headstone and it was shipped to them. I've got multiple burial sites where I know by the obituary, by the death record, the certificate, he's buried in this cemetery, and he received the stone, but there's no stone in the cemetery, so he's in an unmarked grave somewhere in the cemetery.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Oh wow!
So right now I'm working on the 54th Massachusetts. With the mass burial ground they had on Morris Island. There's some speculation that those guys were actually moved to Beaufort. I'm not sure. There was a lot of guys that passed away and never went to battle, such as like the 21st, right up on Stono River, just outside of down where they were at. 15 of them drowned one day when their boat they were on flipped over as they were trying to build a pontoon bridge, and all 15 of them drowned and died. I started looking through the dust like, this is the same day. They had 5 guys die on the same day. And then I looked, I said, and I found the information about that. I said, oh my God, and you don't hear about this information in history books. There is a set of books called it's the compendium book system of all the military records from the Union and the Confederacy. It's like in a 60-something volume set, and it's also been digitized. So I use that, obituaries, death certificates, pension records, headstone requests, newspaper articles, just that type thing. And sometimes, as I tell people in our genealogy 101 class at the museum, sometimes there's just nothing there. You don't have anything to pursue any farther. It's a rarity, but it does happen more often than you think. And it's really hard to talk about it with some people because in essence you're telling them we can't find any information on your family at this time. And
so what led you to actually start like doing research towards African American, burial and stuff? What actually made you start doing this?
In my family, my fourth great grandfather had 2 wives. The first wife was my grandmother, and his second wife was a slave woman from the plantation where she was at. They stayed together after emancipation. For years, always wondered why he was on the south side of Horry County and everybody else was on the north side, and in Conway up that way. In Bucksport, South Carolina, is where the center point is for the Black Mishoe families. And we've been to several family reunions, and I was asked by a lady one time when I was working on Monrovia Street Cemetery, and I was laying on the ground working on a gravestone, had fallen over, been covered by years and years of dead foliage. And the lady came up along with Dr. O'Funnion, and it was a couple from the city of Charleston. And she asked me, why are you so interested in working on colored cemeteries? Just like that. And she could ask it several different ways. Hey, why do you like working on black cemeteries? I'm interested. And immediately Doc tapped me on the toe. He's like, no, because I think he was trying to get donations or something. And I did not what I might do usually, but I said, ma'am, you see the gravestones over this direction right here that are cemented into the wall for the on-ramp to I-26 from Harriet Street. And she said, yes, I see that. I said, you didn't see them build the interstate through your ancestors' graves in Magnolia Cemetery, now did you?
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
And of course, Doc was like,
Yes.
But the main reason I do this, because there's not a lot of representation for it. And if you've had family has been here as long as mine, that you almost for certain know that they, as the Confederate vice president told about our peculiar institution, that they were involved in enslavement. And I never found any records or bills of sale or anything. And then I found some. And I'm like, wow, I've got evidence now that it actually happened, And so I say now that my family early on sold and purchased and broke up families. And now I'm doing my family's penance by reacquainting the descendants with the ancestors in the best way I know how. This is how I know how to do it.
Wow.
And it sounds like you not only found records, you found family.
Absolutely, yes. Sometimes we'll have somebody come up and well, for instance, not the United States Color Troop, but there's a very dear woman, friend of mine that lives here named Joanna Martin Carrington. And her family, her father, her grandfather, and great-grandfather, they come from Martin's Point or Martin's area where in Cainhoy, the great-grandfather being enslaved at Martin's Point. That's where the Martin name came from. And a gentleman was doing some research, like in South Dakota. They come across a little blurb in the newspaper where a Thomas Martin, a police officer for the city of Charleston, had been shot and killed in downtown Charleston in 1872 or 71. And he went to look at the state line of duty death memorial, the city line of duty death memorial, the federal, and he wasn't on any of that. He had just kind of dropped off the radar, fell through the cracks per se. And he had sent an email to Chief Luther, who sadly passed away now, of the city of Charleston Police Department. And he immediately put a friend of mine, Christopher DeBose, on the case and trying to find this thing out. So they got with the Mormon Church at the Family History Center in West Ashley, and they worked on it for several weeks, if not a month or so, and they just kind of hit a roadblock. So they, one of the ladies there contacted me and asked me if I could help. And she said, "This is the information I know, and I have some more information. I'll call you back later on this afternoon." I said, "Okay." So I started working on this. Well, I don't know too many black folks with the last name of Martin. So I immediately went to the one person I know, Joanna Martin Carrington, who happened to be the chairman of the board of the Gullah Society, and traced it. And I immediately went back into Cainhoy, and I was like, "My latest right here," and then matched the census records, which is another one I didn't mention, and found out that this was her great grandfather. And she'd been for years she knew that she had a great grandfather named Thomas Martin, but never knew what happened to him or anything. And come to find out, he was running patrol on King Street near Burns Lane. And there was a group of soldiers from the 2nd Wisconsin Infantry that were headquarters at the old Citadel during Reconstruction. And one of the sergeants by witnesses, one of the sergeants said that he was going to kill himself a Negro today. And when Thomas Martin came up, he said, "Hey, can y'all keep it down?" And a lot of the privates going, "Yeah, absolutely, no problem, we'll do that." This sergeant pulled a pistol and shot him. Boom, shot him right there. There's a white guy across the street from a window looking. He was a witness, and he said, "Yes, this guy did that." He took off down the street and ran to. He also shot another police officer, but I think it was just a leg wound. He went to the old Citadel and with everybody in chase, both white and black police officers, and they were met by the guard at the gate, wanting to know what they wanted. And the officer on watch, I think was a lieutenant, came up, and the police officer told him that he just shot one of our police officers in the chest down here at King Street, and we need him. Now, lots of times if you do something like that, military courts and different things might get involved, but he immediately handed him over to the police department. So one thing led to another, and there was 2 people that were charged with it. Of course, the one guy for the killing, and about 2.5 years later, when they finally went to court, they were found innocent by a jury of their peers. And I say that mockingly, of course. And to add insult to injury, the lawyer for the men that came from the 2nd Wisconsin who had to come back here to be witnesses actually sued the state for reimbursement for their travel expenses and got it. So it's stuff like that. You look back and you find it and say, this guy was here, and he's buried. Pretty sure he's buried in an unmarked section of Monrovia Cemetery that's been broken up now, but he's under some buildings and that type thing close to Meeting Street. And when I told Miss Carrington all this, she was like, she was tearful. She was very sad. And we've been trying to locate stuff, but there's no grave markers or anything. We just know he was buried there. But later on, she went to Washington, D.C. with the Charleston Police Department. And when he was engraved on the monument there, and also the state monument, as well as the city of Charleston monument. So he has officially been added to the those rolls of honor from the line of duty deaths.
That's awesome. So now I wanna address some things. We have some members on our audience who have been making certain comments, and I want to be clear about some stuff. Our guests that we have, their thoughts are theirs, their opinions are theirs. Now we may agree in some of them, and some of them we may not, or but it's still their opinions. um we try to stay focused on the show at hand and what we're talking about. As of right now, we are discussing the African American burial. We will go on reparations once we get to that. We're trying to get a show about that, and we are working towards it. We will ask the audience to please try to stay on topic. And the topic right now is African American burial grounds. So, Grant, I appreciate everything that you are saying at this moment
Yes,
about
ma'am.
this. And we definitely appreciate all of the work that you are doing. We also ask that our audience be respectful and be mindful of the things that you are saying and that what you're doing. You have your opinions on how people say things and what they say, and we respect that, and we hope that you continue to respect what other people say. Now,
And you and I have certainly, both of us have used the vernacular of the time period.
Mhm.
So it is
right,
what it is.
I mean,
that's
of
right.
course, we don't go using the N word or anything, but there's different, like the percent of uh, black, I guess you say, or Negro that you'd have in one, they'd be listed as mulatto. But if they were from like Louisiana, I've even seen this in the South Carolina death records where they're listed as octoroons, which mean you're an eighth black,
Exactly.
you know. And
Exactly.
You
between
know,
me and Dr. O'Funnion, there was no big pink elephant in the room. We talked about it exactly. It was on the records,
And it's
because
not
you
one
have to.
here either. It's
No,
it's not an elephant here either. And I'm glad that you are making the comments that you're making and saying the things that you are saying. But I want our audience to know and understand that we are going to use the vernacular of that timing and of that period. You made the comments that were being said during that time, and that's what that person said, the
yeah,
colored or whatever the case, that's what was being said. I
a direct
like it.
quote.
I It was a direct
It's a
quote.
direct,
I love it. So that's what
yeah.
you're
So,
I need for everybody to understand that we support every word that you're saying, because y'all know my mouth will slip up in a minute. So hey, we all know who I am. My mouth will slip in a second. I have to every now and then, Grant. I don't know how often you've watched our show, but I will look at Brian and be like, should I have not said that? Because I'll be quick.
right.
I'll
Well,
be
the one
quick to
thing that
say it.
I've learned is that you cannot have genealogy without cemeteries, and you cannot have cemeteries without genealogy. When I do genealogy for somebody and I find something, where are they buried? That's one of the first questions they usually ask. With African American
mhm,
cemeteries, it becomes difficult, especially if they show up in the 1870 record, but are not in the
yeah.
1860 census. In the 1870 census, it's almost 100% that they were enslaved prior to emancipation. And so when you look at these and you see the names, there's several, and it goes on both sides. You know, lots of times you'll see the male child named after the mother's maiden name. So there may be
Mhm,
several different sources of that. Or the we literally had a couple that was in Charleston in the early 1900s. They had 11 children. The wife passed away, and the father, literally went down the street handing children off to aunts and uncles and cousins, and then dropped off the radar, just completely disappeared. And by the next time the census came around, they weren't nieces and nephews; they were sons and daughters. So you find out that your oldest sister was actually your mother. You were born
mhm.
very, very young, and the grandparents were actually raising you as their child. You know,
Right.
Yeah,
and
we have
or I'm sorry, go ahead.
We've certainly come across that.
Also, your parents are passed away, your sisters passed away, your brothers passed away, you're the last of them, and come to find out you were adopted and not related to them at all. That's a big kick in the pants. So I always tell people that something might fall out of the closet. I can't be responsible for that, but I don't blast it in front of the whole family. I'll always go back to the person that I'm talking to and talk to them one-on-one and said, hey, I'm gonna let you if you want to find out. One instance, there was a gentleman that was from Johns Island who passed away in Vietnam and said he was killed by a mortar shell. And looking from the reports and then looking at the maps of the area, because I was literally right on top of the same rice field and the same dike and everything that was hit, stuff kind of wasn't jiving between the two reports and stuff like this. So I figured I'd look up on some of these places where former soldiers will go try to find out where other of their former comrades are at, and found some people from his unit. So I got very, very, very lucky. The first person I actually contacted, he said, oh, I could tell you about it because I was the other guy who got hit by the same mortar. So I talked to him, and he quickly explained to me what happened, and it floored me. And what had happened was was a bad area. It was raining real hard. They couldn't bring helos in to excavate them out. So they posted APVs, armored patrol carrier, APCs around with guns on them to protect them. And sometime during the middle of the night, one of them started one up and backed over him and basically crushed him. And he survived getting to, but he died in the hospital. That's why he died, but I can understand, hey, if that happened to something, but, it contributed injuries too, but they solely said that he died by mortar fire because this accident was swept under the rug, which was not told to the family exactly what happened.
Horrible. I do have a quick question about the USCT burials.
Right.
So we know that for a lot of patriots from the American Revolutionary War, there is a symbol on their tombstone. There are military symbols on World War I and World War II veteran tombstones. Right. Is there a specific symbol or a group of symbols that, if someone's out in a really old cemetery, whether they're helping to restore in their local community, that they're helping to restore or clean up or, take care of, is there a group of symbols that they should keep their eye out for?
A majority of the gravestones that came from the Civil War are the old shield type stone. It's got a shield on it, and it's got his name on it, and company, and the company name and the regiment he was with. The ones you see in the national cemeteries had the same shield, but there's a number engraved on it with the man's name in USCT or USCLA for light artillery, HA for heavy artillery, or I for infantry, C for cavalry, and that type thing. There are several, that I've seen that are newer stones, and it'll have information in there, or it had replaced an older stone. So they're more of a conventional military stone as you would see today. But if it's back from that time, especially if you look at Arlington National Cemetery, there's several sections of just nothing but, the name, and then there's rows and rows of unknown, USCT unknown, and we're talking about Beaufort National Cemetery. And they could be in lots of different types of shape. I mean, they're, if you get a small crack in it, gets water in it, it freezes, pop, it could pop the stone. But yeah, that's basically what you're looking for.
Cool. And presumably the same for USCT servicemen who served in the Navy.
Correct. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yes. It'll say the same thing, but it'll say U.S. Navy. The one that I know where they've got a lot of modern ones is the 26 members of the USCT and U.S. Navy that received the Medal of Honor. And it was 26. And a lot of them have got the newer stones that are actually, the inlays were painted in gold and that type thing because they were Congressional Medal of Honor recipient. there was 26. I mean, the USCT was 180 something thousand troops. There's a total of 211. The rest of them were white officers. But in that, from 1863 to 1865, there were 26 Medal of Honor recipients that were black, and 14 from the same battle.
Oh,
Battle
wow.
of Chapin Farm in New Market Heights, Virginia. 4 of them, I do believe, are from the same incident when they were carrying the battle flag. Now, Abraham Lincoln put the Congressional Medal of Honor in effect in 1863, and it went on, and a lot of the Army ones, you could find their gravestones, but we can't find any with the Navy because one guy died off the coast of China or Singapore after the war, and his medal is still sitting in the Navy Museum in Washington, D.C., unclaimed. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, so it's these guys,
And did we have his name?
Yes, ma'am. His name was Thomas English. He was born in 1819 and passed away in 1868 off the coast of Singapore. He was a seaman on the USS New Ironsides. He died aboard the USS Piscataqua, buried at sea. He was in the Second Battle of Fort Fisher, North Carolina. Is where he he received his award for his actions there.
And they can't find any family members or nothing like that.
Well, I don't know. I would assume that they have been looked, but it still sits unclaimed there.
I mean, that's just so crazy to me. Like, here in the Washington D.C. area, a lady was talking, and it's not U.S. colored troops, but it was more for Tuskegee Airmen. A lady was talking about how all of her father's stuff had gone missing, and Channel 4 News had talked to her about it, and it somehow got out, and it got out to someone, I think, in North Carolina, and she ended up and when the person that heard about it in North Carolina, she ended up purchasing this person's stuff on eBay. And when she heard about it, and she gave it back. So maybe if they contacted local news stations of where he made, if they really did that overall research on this man, and that just doesn't sound right to me.
He's on my list to do research on.
Okay.
I've got several irons and several different fires when it comes to this thing. So so yeah, it's there. It's definitely something that I don't like seeing. That type of, so it will be researched. It's just I haven't been able to do it so far.
Wow.
Man, talk about dying far, far from home.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, send me his name. I'll do a quick search too. That's crazy.
Okay. But again, that's part and parcel of doing any kind of research. But in this time period with this group of, this group of people, just the unexpected stories,
especially
that come to light.
If he joined the USCT under one name and then changed his name afterward and moved to the Midwest or moved to Texas or moved to California or something like that, that could literally end it right there.
Yeah.
Because again, I guess, fitting into the mission of the museum, which is about telling the untold stories of African Americans specifically, that I think that's also part and parcel of your passion behind this, is the stories that you find and the stories that you want to share and the knowledge that you're adding specifically to black military service.
Absolutely. Yes. There's a lot of stories that these guys, even before the war and after the war, and they just need the recognition that the other side's getting. And I'm not trying to pick sides, that type of thing, but this is what I do. And this is the project I decided to start, and I'm going to see it through, if not hand it off to somebody else,
Right.
And there's just not the recognition. Now, I've had several people send some information about black Confederate soldiers that fought. That's a whole different Oprah Winfrey show. Um, and and not saying that I can't say that there was a black soldier or a person that was enslaved, with a soldier in the unit that never picked up a gun. It's quite
Right.
obvious, that if you get somebody running at you, shooting at you, I'm gonna pick up something, or pick up a stick and start swinging or something.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but as an organized force within the Confederate Army, no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't believe that either. Well, you know what? This time has gone really fast. And Grant, I have to come to Charleston. I have to meet you because I think we're kindred spirits.
Oh, absolutely. I know me and
I
Brian are. It's been
No,
great
no,
working with them.
I don't know about you or Brian, but Brian will tell you, you done said some things that put me and you on a different level. So
It's true. It's true.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, you and I definitely need to meet. But this was an awesome show, and I thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes,
Yes,
thank
yes,
you, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and for speaking truth.
yes, for
Yes,
speaking
somebody's
much
got to
truth.
do it.
Somebody got to do it. I know that's right.
Yes, ma'am.
I believe in it. So
Oh, and for
next
once,
week, guys, we go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say, for once, it wasn't us.
Right.
Ish, ish.
Ish. So next week we will be having Darius Brown. We will finish up our IAAM series with Darius Brown,
Darius.
and yes, Darius, he will be on our show. He's going to be talking about his new book that's going to be coming out.
It's already out.
Um, it's out. That's right. It
Yes.
is. So
Yes.
we're going to be
Hmm.
talking with that. Yes, we're going to be talking with Darius about his new book. I want to thank you guys for joining us this Sunday. Brian?
As always, thank you for tuning in and sharing this hour with us. Grant, once again, thank you so much for appearing on the show and for
Yes.
again just talking about these just really fascinating parts of histories and projects. And until next week, 4 p.m. Eastern
Yes.
Standard
Don't
Time,
hang
and
up
all of
either, Brian.
yes, no, I
If I
won't.
may, real quick, if anybody has any information about graves or something, they can email me at the museum at gmishoe@iaamuseum.org.
Yes, please do.
Say,
So
say
until
that
next
again.
week. Oh, it's a G Mishoe, Mishoe at
Mm-hmm.
IAAmuseum.org.
Okay. All right. And thank you guys again. Grant, don't hang up.
Okay, I won't.
We will see you next week.
And until then, enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.